Okay, so you're learning English, right? And you feel like you've got a pretty good handle on the grammar. Maybe you've even got a decent vocabulary, but then you try to watch a movie or you have like a fast-paced conversation and suddenly it's like you hit a wall.
It's like all that knowledge, all that book learning just doesn't quite translate to real world listening, does it?
Yeah, totally. It's a whole different ballgame. So today we're doing a deep dive into how to improve your English listening skills. And to help us out, we've got this great podcast called How to Improve Your Listening Skills, hosted by Sophia and Alex. We really dug into it, and we're going to be pulling out the most practical and insightful tips we could find.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to improve your English listening, this is like a cheat sheet for all the best strategies. I mean, Sophia and Alex make a really good point right off the bat that this isn't just about passively hearing English, it's about actively understanding it.
Right. It's like you could listen to English radio all day long, but if you're not really paying attention, are you really learning anything?
Exactly. It's got to be intentional. You have to be engaged. And that's really what this deep dive is all about. It's about helping you move from just hearing sounds to actually understanding what's being said.
And let's be honest here. Sometimes when you're listening to native speakers, they talk so fast, it's like they're speaking a different language altogether.
Oh, I know that feeling. It can be really intimidating. But here's the thing. Sophia and Alex actually say you don't need to understand every single word to get the gist of a conversation. And that's what we're going to be exploring today, how context can actually become your secret weapon for filling in the blanks.
I love that idea. Context is a secret weapon. All right, so let's jump right into it and break down the key strategies that Sophia and Alex recommend. And one of the first things they talk about is the difference between active listening and passive listening.
Yeah, they really emphasize that distinction, don't they? So how would you describe the difference between the two?
Well, I think of active listening like going to the gym for your ears. Sure. It's all about focused, deliberate effort to understand what you're hearing. So, for example, Sophia and Alex talk about things like listening to podcasts that have quizzes, so you can actually check your understanding. Or they talk about shadowing, which is basically where you repeat what you hear as you're hearing it.
Right, so you're kind of mimicking the speaker and trying to match their rhythm and pronunciation. I guess that's really good for getting the sounds right.
Exactly. And then on the flip side, you have passive listening, which is more like taking a leisurely stroll in the park. Yeah, you're still surrounded by the sounds of English, but it's a much more relaxed approach.
So like having English radio on in the background while you're cooking or something like that.
Precisely. And the interesting thing is that both types of listening actually have their own benefits. Active listening is where you're really going to build those core comprehension muscles.
Yeah.
You're actively pushing yourself to understand specific details.
And passive listening, well, even though it's less intense, it helps you develop a feel for the natural rhythm and flow of the language. You start to pick up on those patterns subconsciously.
Absolutely. And Sophia and Alex make it clear that it's not like you have to choose one or the other. They actually recommend combining both approaches.
Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe you could listen actively to a podcast episode when you have time to really focus. And then later on, you could put the same episode on in the background while you're doing something else just to kind of reinforce what you've learned.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like reviewing study notes. That initial focused attention makes the passive exposure much more effective.
It's all about maximizing your learning. I like that. Now, Sophia and Alex, they also talk about different resources that you can use to improve your listening skills. And podcasts, obviously, are a great place to start.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And they actually recommend a specific podcast for beginners called The English We Speak, which is produced by the BBC.
And what's so good about that one?
Well, it's perfect for beginners because the episodes are really short and clear, and they focus on common English phrases. So you're not getting bombarded with a ton of information, And the focus on specific phrases makes it really easy to digest.
That makes sense, sort of bite-sized learning. And what about for more advanced learners? What do they recommend?
For more advanced learners, Sophia and Alex basically say go for podcasts that you're genuinely interested in, you know? So if you're into science, listen to science podcasts. If you like history, there are history podcasts out there. It's all about finding something that keeps you engaged and coming back for more.
Because if you're genuinely interested in the topic, you're way more likely to pay attention and actually learn something, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we've got movies and TV shows, which are amazing resources for improving your listening.
Yeah, but I think a lot of learners tend to rely on subtitles in their native language when they're watching movies and TV shows.
And that's understandable. But Sophia and Alex actually suggest something different. They say you should try watching with English subtitles instead.
So you're seeing the words written out as you hear them. That way you're making a direct connection between the spoken word and the written form.
Yeah, and it's like your eyes and your ears are working together to reinforce that connection between the sound and the spelling.
Makes sense. And they also recommend re-watching content that you're already familiar with. So maybe you watch a movie once with English subtitles and then you watch it again without them.
Yeah, because if you already know the plot, you can focus more on the language itself rather than trying to figure out what's happening in the story.
That's a clever strategy.
Yeah.
And then there's music, which you might not think of as a learning tool, but it can be surprisingly effective.
Oh, yeah. Music is fantastic for picking up on the natural rhythm and flow of English. And songs often incorporate slang and informal language that you might not find in textbooks.
Yeah, and the music itself, the melody and the rhythm can actually help you remember phrases and words.
Absolutely. And Sophia and Alex, they recommend looking up the lyrics of songs that you like and then singing along. It's a fun way to practice pronunciation and to get comfortable with those natural speech patterns.
Plus, it's just a fun way to learn, you know?
Yeah.
And they even point out that songs often use common contractions like gonna and wanna, which are short for going to and want to. So you're getting exposure to everyday spoken English.
It's like a sneaky way to learn grammar without even realizing it.
I love it. So in this section, they also clarify some key terms for us just to make sure we're all on the same page. They define comprehension as your ability to understand what you hear subtitles as the text that you see on the screen, and mimicking as copying how native speakers talk. You know, just having a clear understanding of those terms can really help us delve deeper into these techniques.
All right, so now let's get into something that's really central to Sophia and Alex's message, which is that you don't need to understand every single word to understand spoken English. It's all about the power of context.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting. It's about using all the information that's available to you to infer meaning. You know, like the speaker's tone of voice, any visual cues if you're watching something, and just the overall situation.
Right, and to actually use a really great example, imagine someone says, pass me the thingy for the soup, and they're gesturing towards a spoon.
You know exactly what they mean, even though they didn't use the word spoon.
Right. The context gives you all the clues you need. Yeah. And that's exactly what Sophia and Alex are getting at. They say you should approach listening like a detective piecing together clues.
Love that analogy. And they suggest a fun little exercise for practicing this. You can watch a short clip from a movie or a TV show without subtitles first and really try to understand what's going on just from the visuals in the situation.
And then you watch it again with subtitles to see how well you did. It's a great way to train your brain to rely on more than just individual words.
Yeah, because in real life conversations, you don't have time to stop and look up every word you don't know. You have to be able to infer meaning on the fly.
And they actually say that actively trying to fill in the gaps by guessing from context is actually more beneficial for learning than constantly reaching for a dictionary.
It forces you to think in English and to really use your brain to figure things out.
Exactly. It's like a mental workout. All right, so moving on to another technique that Sophia and Alex recommend. And this one might feel a little strange at first, but it's incredibly effective. It's called mimicking and shadowing.
Yeah, I've heard of this before. It's like linguistic karaoke or something, right?
That's a great way to put it. Basically, you listen to a short audio clip and then you immediately speak along with it, trying to match the speaker's rhythm, intonation, and pronunciation as closely as you can.
See, you're kind of like their echo. You're not really focusing on the meaning of the words at that point, just the sounds and how they're put together.
Right. And Sophia and Alex, they break it down into a few steps. First, you find a short audio clip with the transcript. Then you listen to it once just to get a feel for it. And then you play it again. And this time you speak along with it, trying to mirror the speaker's voice as accurately as possible.
Yeah. And they have a really great tip for this. They say you should record yourself while you're shadowing and then listen back to the recording and compare it to the original audio.
Oh, that's such a good idea, because you might notice subtle differences in your pronunciation that you wouldn't catch otherwise.
Yeah, like maybe you're pronouncing a vowel sound a little bit differently, or maybe your rhythm is a bit off. And having that recording to compare it to really helps you pinpoint those areas where you need to improve.
It's like getting instant feedback on your pronunciation. And in this section, Sophia and Alex, they also talk about the concept of accent reduction, which they emphasize doesn't mean eliminating your accent entirely, because everyone has an accent.
It's more about making your pronunciation clear enough to be easily understood.
And they also touch upon the importance of intonation, which is the rise and fall of your voice when you speak. You know, how your voice goes up at the end of a question, for example.
Yeah, intonation really adds meaning and emotion to your speech, and it can make a big difference in how you're perceived by others. And shadowing is actually a fantastic way to practice intonation because you're trying to replicate the speaker's voice as closely as possible.
Okay, so to keep our motivation levels high, let's talk about some of the success stories that Sophia and Alex share in their podcast. It's always inspiring to hear about other learners who have made progress with their listening skills.
Definitely. They talk about a listener named Anna from Brazil who went from understanding about 30% of conversations to 80% after consistently using the podcast exercises.
That's incredible. That's like a huge jump in comprehension.
Right. And her secret weapon was the 7-day challenge, which Sophia and Alex encourage all their listeners to try.
So what is this 7-day challenge?
Well, it involves watching a single movie scene 3 times over the course of a week. The first time you watch it with subtitles in your native language, just to make sure you understand the basic plot. Then you watch it again with English subtitles to connect the sounds and the written words. And then finally, you watch it with no subtitles at all to really test your listening comprehension.
So you're gradually increasing the challenge each time.
Exactly. And Anna, she found that by the end of the week, she was picking up on phrases and nuances that she'd completely missed before. It's proof that with focused effort, you can really see significant improvement in your listening skills.
That's so motivating. And they also mention another listener, Marco from Italy, who improved his listening by listening to cooking podcasts while he was cooking.
Which just goes to show you can make language learning a part of your daily routine, you know? Just find something that interests you and incorporate it into your life.
That's such a great tip. All right, so let's move on to some of the common questions that learners have about improving their listening skills. One question that comes up a lot is how to understand fast speakers.
Yeah, because native speakers can really talk a mile a minute sometimes.
They sure can. And Sophia's advice for this is to start with slowed down audio. You can actually adjust the playback speed on YouTube or use audio editing software like Audacity to slow down podcasts or other audio by like 10 to 20%.
So you're basically easing your brain into processing the sounds and words at more manageable pace.
Exactly. And then as your comprehension improves, you can gradually increase the speed back to normal.
Makes sense. And another question that Sophia and Alex address is whether audiobooks are good for listening practice.
Yeah, what do they say about that?
Well, they're definitely pro audiobooks, but they have a couple of recommendations for making them more effective. First, they suggest choosing books that you've already read in your native language.
Oh, I see. So you're already familiar with the story.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
you can focus more on the language itself. And then they also recommend starting with young adult novels because the language tends to be a bit clearer and less complex.
That's a good tip. And it's kind of like watching a movie you've already seen. You know, you can relax and pay more attention to the details.
Exactly. And they also say it can be helpful to listen to the audiobook while following along with the text, either in a physical book or an ebook.
So you're getting that visual reinforcement as well.
Right.
All right, so the last question we'll tackle is a big one. How long does it actually take to see improvement in your listening skills?
Because let's be honest, we all want to know when our efforts are going to start paying off.
Absolutely. And Sophia and Alex, they say that most people start to notice a difference within 2 to 3 weeks of consistent daily practice. But they also emphasize the importance of tracking your progress.
So maybe you revisit an audio clip that you found really challenging a few weeks ago and see if you can understand more of it now.
That's a great idea. It's like a little test to see how far you've come.
And even if you don't feel like you're making huge leaps and bounds, just noticing that you're understanding a little bit more each week can be a really powerful motivator.
It's all about celebrating those small victories. So as we wrap up our deep dive into improving English listening skills, Sophia and Alex, they share a little anecdote that I thought was really encouraging.
What's that?
Sophia was telling a story about how she once misheard her barista. She thought the barista said, "Your coffee needs a parachute," when she actually said, "Your coffee needs a paper sleeve."
Wait, she thought the barista said her coffee needed a parachute.
Yeah, and I just thought it was such a funny and relatable story because it shows that even native speakers mishear things sometimes.
It's true. We all make mistakes, and it's okay to laugh at ourselves sometimes.
Absolutely. And the point is that it's okay to not understand everything perfectly. It's about progress, not perfection.
And as long as you're making an effort and you're enjoying the journey, that's what really matters.
Couldn't agree more. And finally, they offer one last bonus tip called the 3-2-1 method.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this 3-2-1 method.
Okay, so it involves listening to the same short audio clip 3 times. The first time you listen while reading the transcript, so you're getting the full picture. The second time you listen without the transcript to test your comprehension. And then the third time you summarize what you understood in your own words.
Oh, wow. So you're really engaging with the material on multiple levels. You're listening, you're reading, and you're even getting some speaking practice in there.
Exactly. It's a great way to make the most of your listening practice. And Sophia and Alex, they say they'll be providing some suitable audio clips for the 3-2-1 method in their show notes.
Awesome. So listeners can actually go and try it out for themselves.
Yeah. So there you have it, a deep dive into how to improve your English listening skills based on the wisdom of Sophia and Alex. The bottom line is that consistent, focused listening practice is key. And the more you engage with the language in different ways, the better you'll become at understanding it.
And the cool thing is there are so many different resources and techniques available. You can find something that works for you and that you actually enjoy.
Exactly. So don't be afraid to experiment and have fun with it. And remember, it's all about progress, not perfection. So as you go about your week, think about those little moments where you've experienced improved understanding in English. Maybe you understood a word you've never heard before, or maybe you were able to follow a conversation a little bit better than you could before. How can you create more of those moments using the strategies we talked about today?
Yeah, and think about a specific piece of English audio that you found challenging before. How might you approach it differently now after learning about these new techniques? Would you try slowing down the audio? Would you try using English subtitles? Would you give shadowing a shot? It's all about finding what works for you and making a conscious effort to improve.
So keep listening, keep practicing, and keep celebrating those small wins because every step forward, no matter how small, is a step in the right direction.
And who knows, maybe one day you'll be able to understand even the fastest of fast talkers without breaking a sweat.
Until then, happy listening.
Happy listening.